The worship of Saturn. Saturn, so active in the cosmic changes, was regarded by all mankind as the supreme god. Seneca says that Epigenes, who studied astronomy among the Chaldeans, estimate that the planet Saturn exerts the greatest influence upon all the movements of celestial bodies. On becoming a nova, it ejected filaments in all directions, and the solar system became illuminated, as if by 100 suns. It subsided rather quickly and retreated into faraway regions. Peoples that remembered early tragedies enacted in the sky by the heavenly bodies asserted that Jupiter drove Saturn away from its place in the sky. Before Jupiter, Zeus, became the chief god. Saturn, Kronos, occupied the celestial throne. In all ancient religions, the dominion passes from Saturn to Jupiter. In Greek mythology, Kronos is presented as the father and Zeus as his son, who dethrones him. Kronos devours some of his children. After this act, Zeus overpowers his father, puts him in chains, and drives him from his royal station in the sky. In Egyptian folklore, or religion, the participants of the drama are said to be Osiris, Saturn, brother and husband of Isis, Jupiter. The cult of Osiris and the mysteries associated with it dominated the Egyptian religion as nothing else. Every dead man or woman was entombed with observances honoring Osiris. The city of Abydos in the desert west of the Nile and northwest of Thebes was sacred to him. Sais in the delta, used to commemorate the floating of Osiris' body carried by the Nile into the Mediterranean. What made Osiris so deeply ingrained in the religious memory of the nation that his cult pervaded mythology and religion? Osiris' dominion, before his murder by Seth, was remembered as a time of bliss. According to the legend, Seth, Osiris' brother, killed and dismembered him, whereupon Isis, Osiris' wife, went on peregrinations to collect his dispersed members. Having gathered them and wrapped them together with swathings, she brought Osiris back to life. The memory of this event was a matter of yearly jubilation among the Egyptians. Osiris became Lord of the Netherworld, land of the dead. A legend, a prominent part of the Osiris cycle, tells that Isis gave birth to Horus, whom she conceived from an already dead Osiris, and that Horus grew up to avenge his father by engaging Seth in mortal combat. In Egyptology, the meaning of these occurrences stands as unresolved mystery. The myth of Osiris is too remarkable and occurs in too many divergent forms not to contain a considerable element of historic truth, wrote Sir Alan Gardner, the leading scholar in these fields. But what historical truth is it? Could it be of an ancient king upon whose tragic death the entire legend hinged? Wondered Gardner. But of such a thing, not a trace has been found before the time of the pyramid texts. And in these texts, Osiris is spoken of without end. There he appears as a dead god, or a king, or judge of the dead. But who was Osiris in his life? Asked Gardner. At times, he is represented to us as the vegetation which perishes in the flood water mysteriously issuing from himself. He is associated with brilliant light. After a life of studying Egyptian history and religion, Gardner confessed that he remained unaware of whom Osiris represented or memorialized. The origin of Osiris remains from me an unsolvable mystery, nor could others in his field help him find an answer. The Egyptologist John Wilson wrote that it is an admission of failure that the chief cultural content of Egyptian civilization, its religion, its mythological features, again and again narrated and alluded to in text and represented in statues and temple reliefs, is not understood. The astral meaning of Egyptian deities was not realized, and the cosmic events their activities represent were not thought of. The prophet Ezekiel in the Babylonian exile had a vision, the likeness of a man, but made of fire and amber, who lifted him by the lock of his hair and brought him to some darkened chamber where the ancients of the house of Israel, with censers in their hands, were worshipping idols portrayed upon the wall round about. Then the angel of the vision told him, Thou shalt see greater abominations that they do. And he brought the prophet to the door of the gate of the Lord's house, and behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz. Next, he showed him in the inner court of the Lord's house, with their back toward the temple of the Lord and their faces toward the east, and they worshipped the sun toward the east. The worship of the sun and the planets was decried by Jeremiah, a contemporary of Ezekiel. But what was this weeping for Tammuz? Tammuz was a Babylonian god. One of the months of the year, approximately coinciding with July, in the summer, was named in his honor. By this very name it is known in the present-day Hebrew calendar. Tammuz was the god that died and was taken and was then hidden in the underworld. His death was the reason for a fast, accompanied by lamentations of women of the land. His finding or his return to life and resurrection were the motifs of the Passion. Tammuz was a god of vegetation and of flood and of seeds. The god Tammuz came from Armenia every year in his ark in the overflowing river, blessing the alluvium with new growth. In the month of Tammuz he was bound to the liturgies speak of his having been drowned among the flowers which were thrown upon him as he sank beneath the waves of the Euphrates. The drowning of Tammuz was an occasion for wailing by women. The flood has taken Tammuz. The raging storm has brought him low. Of Tammuz it is also narrated that he was associated with brilliant light, with descent into the netherworld, visited there by Ishtar, his spouse. Tammuz's death, his subsequent resurrection, or his discovery in the far reaches, but no longer brilliant, where the themes of the cult that was not just one of the mysteries, but the chief and paramount cult. The Osirian mysteries for the wailing of Tammuz all refer to the transformation of Saturn during and following the deluge. Osiris was not a king, but the planet Saturn, Kronos of the Greeks, Tammuz of the Babylonians. The Babylonians called Saturn the star of Tammuz. After the deluge, Saturn was invisible. The sky was covered for a long time by clouds of volcanic dust. And the Egyptians cried for Osiris, and the Babylonians cried for Tammuz. Isis, Jupiter at that time, went in search of her husband, and Ishtar, also Jupiter at that early time, went to the netherworld to find her husband Tammuz. For a time, Saturn disappeared, driven away by Jupiter. But when it reappeared, it was no longer the same planet. It moved very slowly. The disappearance of the planet Saturn in the netherworld became the theme of many religious observances, comprising liturgies, mystery plays, lamentations, and fasts. When Osiris was seen again in the sky, though greatly diminished, the people were frenzied by the return of Osiris from death. Nevertheless, he became king of the netherworld, and that is what Saturn is. In the Egyptian way of seeing the celestial drama, Isis, Jupiter, the spouse of Osiris, Saturn, wrapped him in swathings. Osiris was known as the Swathed, the way the dead came to be dressed for their journey to the world of the dead, over which Osiris reigns. Similar rites were celebrated in honor of Adonis, who died and was resurrected after a stay in the Netherland, in Mysteries of Orpheus. Sir James Frazer, the collector of folklore, came to regard Osiris as a vegetation god. Likewise, he saw in the Babylonian Tammuz an equivalent of the Egyptian Osiris, the vegetation god, and carried away by this concept wrote The Golden Bow. built around the idea that vegetation god that dies and is resurrected the following year. A few peoples, through consecutive planetary ages, kept fidelity to the ancient Saturn, or Kronos, or Brahma, whose age was previous to that of Jupiter. Thus the Scythians were called Manda by the Chaldeans, people of Manda, and Manda is the name of Saturn. The Phoenicians regarded El Saturn as their chief deity. Eusebius informs us that El, a name used also in the Bible as the name for God, was the name of Saturn. In Persia, Saturn was known as Kevin or Kavin. Different names for a god in the Bible reflect the process going through the many ages in which one planet superseded another and was again superseded by the next one in the celestial war. El was the name of Saturn, Adonis of the Syrians. The bewailed deity was also like Osiris, the planet Saturn, but in the period of the contest between the two major planets, Jupiter and Saturn, the appellative of the dual gods became Adonai, which means my lords. Then, with the victory of Jupiter, it came to be applied to him alone. In the beginning, Kronos, the Titan that ruled the entire ether, his star, the far-seeing gods called the Shining One, when Saturn was consigned to the darkness of Tartarus. The world passed under the rule of Jove. Tatius refers to a storm during which Saturn was forcibly expelled by Jupiter and ceased to rule. The connection of Osiris with water or flood water is frequently stressed both by the native Egyptian sources and in reports by classical and early Christian authors. Plutarch wrote that the Nile is the most principle and power, that the Nile is the efflux of Osiris, and that Osiris is Oceanus. Egyptians say that Osiris is water. Knock, in his commentary to his edition of Celestis, compared a 1st century Greek papyrus in which it is written, I am Osiris, who is called water. The drowning of Osiris, described by Plutarch, is attested in some of the earliest Egyptian hieroglyphic texts. That Brahma is Saturn was understood by Velikovsky as long ago as the early 1940s, though he did not publish the idea until 1974, in the text of his lecture before the American Association for the Advancement of Science Symposium, so they did know about it. See Pense 7, 1974. Pense was a magazine that used to bi-monthly, I think, or I'm not sure about how often it came out. It might have been a monthly. And then there was also a journal called Kronos 3. So there must have been 2 before that, too, 77. Maybe look some of those texts up and do some reading from that. I bet there'd be some good stuff in there. The identification of Brahma with Saturn is evidenced by the fact that the god is assigned a celestial sphere. The Ramayana, translated by R. Griffith, Volume 1, London, 1870. The Kalika Purana, a celestial sphere, should probably be interpreted as an orbit. In the Mahabharata, it is further said that the high-souled Brahma is seated in the highest abode, quoted in Shastra, the flood legend.
The
Brahmanyaka, the Upanishad, places Brahman in the highest world in the cosmology of the
Yogavasya of Yasa.
Yasa. The highest celestial sphere is that of Brahma. In the Vishnu Purana, the Brahma Loka, which is the heaven of Brahma, is the 7th and highest heaven. In some sources of the Brahma Loka, is referred to as
Satyaloka.
Tatius, the Histories, in the highest orbit and exerting the greatest influence, moves the star Saturn. Many years ago, F. Wilford reported the opinion of certain learned Brahmins who told him that while Shiva shines in the planet Jupiter, Saturn is directed by Brahma. The Hindus. Asiatic Researches 3. The Hindu Pantheon. I believe Wilford is the unacknowledged source of Moore's assertion that Brahma is Saturn. In China, the planet Saturn was associated with the palace with the emperor. It was called the planet of the Son of Heaven.
Praeparatio of Angelica
Was deified in the star Saturn. This statement is quoted by Eusebius from Philo's redaction of the lost Phoenician history
Sanchuniathan
of Sanchuniathan. Some celestial writers, among them Tacitus, alleged that the Jews were worshippers of Saturn.
Explained the white crown of Egypt and the rest of these things that he showed us, all from mythology, all from thousands of years ago. These things clearly were seen by civilizations that never talked to each other from the far corners of the earth. It all just clicked together like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle in my mind.
A breakthrough for me came when I realized that many different cultures spread around the world use different words, different symbols, different myths to describe precisely the same formations in the sky. The Ouroboros, or celestial serpent biting its tail, for example, occurs on every habitable continent, but it has no ties to the world we now observe. Like all of the archetypes, it is part of an alien sky. A cosmic column rising to the center of the sky, holding aloft the wheel of heaven. And much more than a wheel, because this was the revolving cosmic temple, the city of the gods, the kingdom of heaven, always resting on the cosmic column. Then there's the image of the four rivers or pathways radiating from the center of the sky out to the boundary, the rim of the wheel. The simplest forms lead you invariably to the full story of world mythology. The hero's journey unfolds as the story of the wheel's axle. The mother goddess finds her identity in the star at the summit, the hub and spokes of the wheel.